Click on the subscribe button, especially the bell on the right side. Otherwise, you will miss the latest videos.
And thank you for having me in this program. So whenever I teach, I always do so starting with some prayers, invoking the blessing of Ganesha, of course, but then also the Guru Kanrao, and then also just together, let me chant those prayers. Om Ganantva Ganapati Gunhavamahe, Priyanantva Priyapati Gunhavamahe, Gunhavamahe, Vaso Mama Aham Jani, Kabra Mahatma Jasi Kabinam. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Reva Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guru Nama, Tasmai Shri Guru Nama, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Vanatu, Sahaviryam Karvavahe, Tejasmina, Vaditamastu, Mavin Vishavahe, Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. So as Sunil mentioned, I had the great good fortune of being a student of K.N. Rao's, and I had the greater good fortune of being something of a favored student of his. And I like to say that my astrology is but a pale imitation of K.N. Rao's astrology, but even a pale imitation is a very potent combination. So what I was asked to speak about today, you know, Jyotish is a vast ocean, right? Just so much techniques. And of course, one component of Jyotish is what's called the Ashtakavarga system. So some years ago, I wrote a book called Ashtakavarga Simplified, because like many aspects of Jyotish, Ashtakavarga can get very, very complicated, particularly in its subtle applications. But by just learning some very, very basic things with regards to the system, one can start immediately applying these to the interpretation of the birth chart and also to prediction. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. And sorry, did we start the recording? Are we recording?
Yes, we are recording.
We're recording, okay. So let me share screen. I don't think it's shared yet. Are you seeing it? What are you seeing on the screen now? There we go. Right? See my program, yes?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
we can.
Okay.
Yes.
So Ashtakavarga literally means, Ashtaka means the group of 8. Varga, of course, relates to the word division. And the 8 that's being referred to here is the ascendant, the sun, the moon, the 5 grahas, and not Rahu and Ketu. And through a method given in the ancient texts, each sign relates so many benefic points in terms of some total, which is called the Sarvastika. That's what you're seeing here on the screen. But then also each planet obtains an individual total for each sign, each house. And this is what your programs thankfully produce. In ancient times, they had to go through a very tedious process of doing all this calculation by hand, but we have these marvelous computer programs that now take care of it for us. And I'd like to begin my presentation by talking about a particular case that involved my own birth chart that really brought home to me the importance of Ashtakavarga. It says in the ancient texts that to interpret transits without the use of Ashtakavarga is a crime. And of course, this is rather a statement, but it makes a point. And this point can be illustrated, as I said, using my own chart. Now, if you look on the chapter in Paladipika on Gochara, that is on the interpretation of transits, it talks about how when a planet is transiting a good house, like would be angles and trines, or it's transiting a sign where it has a good dignity, like Mula Trikona, own sign, exalted sign, then these can be very favorable transits. This would be one of the ways in which you would evaluate the favorability of a transit. Contrarily, or contrastingly, it says that it's transiting its debilitation sign, or a sign where it is in the sign of a great enemy. In other words, if it has a poor dignity, especially then if it's also transiting an unfavorable house, like one of the trick houses, then this can be a highly unfavorable transit. But now that can get quickly modified, even reversed, based on the Ashtakavarga, and this is what I want to illustrate with my own chart. Back in February of 2009, I obtained the highest position I'd ever obtained in the corporate world at the highest point of compensation. And I'm not and all that produced that, because all events, they start with a static potential. The potential for an event has to be in the chart. Then that potential has to be being activated in the dasha system. But then lastly, transits have to be supportive. All three of those elements go into an event happening and an event being predicted by Jyotish, such as you and I. So at the time that I obtained this position, which again was almost the high point of my career in corporate America, Jupiter, which was my dasha lord at the time, was transiting Capricorn. So of course, Capricorn is Jupiter's debilitation sign. And if you just went by the principle that I quoted earlier from Paladipika, you might suppose that because Jupiter, the dasha lord, was moving through its debilitation sign, even though it's a good fifth house of my birth chart, that somehow this would be an unfavorable transit. But Varga, in order to qualify that transit, which is again one of the main uses of Ashtakavarga, then you would make a different kind of prediction. The reason being is that you can see that for my chart, Capricorn has 38 billion. Now, baseline strength, please understand, for those who aren't familiar with Ashtakavarga, the baseline strength for any house is 28 degrees. So anything that is starting to be below that, the house starts to get significantly weak. And of course, anything quite higher than that, it becomes significantly strong. So as you can see in my chart, the Savastika for both Capricorn and Aquarius are significantly strong. And then besides the overall point total for a sign or house, there's also this idea that each individual planet has its own individual Ashtakavarga, right? And this is what I'm going to pull up now, if I can find it. Here's so for my chart, let me get it up in the South Indian style chart here. Yeah. Sorry. So if you can look at, this is for the ascendant, we can do it for each planet. And if I get it for Jupiter, which was the transit that I was looking at, you can see that the point total, well, I need to give the information that the range of totals can be anywhere from 0 to 8. So the maximum individual Ashtakavarga benefic points that any sign, any house can get is 8. And you can see that for Capricorn and Aquarius, for me, Jupiter specifically, it has 7 out of 8. So in other words, extremely high. And so on this basis, anyone would predict that, or should be able to predict using this simple Ashtakavarga technique, that for me, the transit of Jupiter in both Capricorn and Aquarius is actually going to be highly favorable, which it was. It was one of the, you might say, supportive factors that indicated that this would be an auspicious time for me professionally. So I want to use this example just to sort of introduce what would be considered the main use of Ashtakavarga qualified transits. Now, you should all be aware that Saturn is now transit Aquarius, and previously it was transiting Capricorn. So again, for me, now I have, when Saturn is transiting first Capricorn and Aquarius, it is especially good. Of course, now Saturn is going to be moving through its own sign. And not only that, these two segments, Capricorn and Aquarius, have such a high Sarvastika total point total, but they also, again, have a very high individual total. For Saturn, who distributes the least amount of benefic points, only 39, a total of 4 is actually usually pretty good. Something like when you get above 4, like 6 or so on and so forth, it's actually rather exceptional. So again, now because I'm running my Saturn major period, it's actually the Dasha Lord. These transits of Saturn through Capricorn and then Aquarius are exceptionally favorable transits. Now, I'm running my Saturn major period. I'm Virgo. It rules the 5th house. And of course, 5th house has to do with one of the things it can mean for someone who's a teacher. It means your students, right? Your shishyas, your disciples, people. It also has to do with one of the meanings of the 5th house has to do with authorship. So the 2.5 years Saturn was transiting Capricorn, I was blessed to attract many just truly outstanding, wonderful students, and also to articles during that time. So this is what I mean when I say that how we use the Ashtakavarga in order to qualify transits. Now, of course, I'm going to show you examples where the reverse is true, right? Later on in the program. I like to joke when I'm teaching transits that if you want to scare someone in India, mention the 2 words Sade Sati, right? Something that can cause a lot of anxiety. And I wish I had $1 for every time someone consulted me at a time when they were about to move into the Sade Sati and they were worried about it. Now, of course, the Sade Sati has the reputation that it has because sometimes it can be a very difficult, very challenging period, but it's not also. And it's incredibly important, as I will show you later on, when we're interpreting the potential effects of Sade Sati, is to see the Ashtakavarga, meaning see, Sade Sati, of course, means 7.5 years. It relates to this the transit of Saturn in the sign before the position of the moon, in the sign where the moon is at birth, and then the sign thereafter. And you want to really see what the major point totals, the Sarvastika, is for each of those signs, and the individual Banashtika, individual point total for Saturn. If, for example, it's kind of what you saw in my chart, this is going to add Saturn through these signs, and during the Sade Sat will be not necessarily all that bad, right? If the point totals are extremely low, both the Sarvastika and the individual totals, and say Saturn's in moons and Saturn's first, well, then it is going to be a period of loss. It is going to be very, very challenging, a period emotionally, mentally, right? And all the significations of the moon and so on and so forth are likely to suffer, right? So want to leave you all you're looking at the Sade Sat, you must always see the Ashtakavarga in terms of qualifying that. Share screen here again. And I'm going to pull up a screen that's going to show you my book. Going too far here, hold on. So now I've just so far been talking about using the Ashtakavarga to qualify transits, but there are ways in which the Ashtakavarga can and should be used in order to do what's might call static potentials of a birth chart, right? And again, the technique is very simple. We're using 337 benefic points distributed over 12 signs. Therefore, as I said, is 28 points. Higher totals, especially those exceeding 30, are favorable for that sign in that house. Lower point totals, especially those below 25, are unfavorable for that sign house. And houses whose totals exceed 35 are significantly strong and therefore are especially noteworthy signs and houses with point totals below 20 to 21 are significantly weak, and therefore they're also noteworthy. I want to immediately caution students, you can't just judge the strength of a house based on the Ashtakavarga totals. If you did that, you'd go wrong. And of course, there are standard methods for determining what might be called the prosperity of the house. This is the word that's used in the ancient classics. When the Lord of the house is in the house, this is one of the best things that can happen to any house. When it's occupied, are extremely favorable that enable a house to prosper. One thing to look for is when a house is both very strong in the Ashtakavarga, but then it's also strong in, you might say, the standard or conventional way of determining the strength of the house. And here I wanted to show you the chart of a billionaire, a man by the name of Ross Perot. You know, had extreme wealth. And you can see there, if you look at his 11th house, you can see that Mars is the 11th Lord in the 11th house. And as one of the indications of his chart, one of the things that shows the static potential for the wealth that he ended up experiencing in life. But of course, there's other Don yogas here. The 5th Lord, Venus, goes to the 2nd house, right? There's a mutual between the moon as the 2nd Lord and Saturn as the 9th Lord. That's a 2-9 combination. They're enhanced by the addition of the natural benefic Jupiter. All those planets in Gemini are hemmed by benefics, Mercury on one side, Venus on the other. So you see here the static potential for wealth, but particularly, you know, if a person experiences extreme wealth, the great multiplier, the 11th house, the 11th Lord, almost invariably is strong and adds significantly to that potential. And you see it here as well. But then if I showed you, and you know, Mars is particularly strong also, not because it's just in its Mula Trichona sign in the birth chart, but you can see in the Vams, it goes to its own sign Scorpio. So really, really powerful 11th Lord. But then look at the Sarvastika total for Aries, his 11th house. It's extraordinary, 42 Sarvastika benefic points, right? So the combination that both in his birth chart conventionally, his 11th house shows such strength, his 11th Lord shows such strength. And then additionally, you have this kind of Sarvastika associated with the 11th house, this static potential of you know, being extremely wealthy. And Ted Turner is another American billionaire, a media mogul, and you can see what good things are happening between his 11th house is that he has an exchange between Mercury, the 11th Lord, goes to the 1st house, Mars, the 1st Lord goes to the 11th house. This is a 1-11 exchange, right? This is a Dhan Yoga, a wealth-giving combination. And in his Mercury and Mahadasha, of course, Mercury here is getting directional strength as well. In his Mercury and Mahadasha, he was so wealthy as a multi-billionaire that he was giving away millions each year to exceptional causes. But then if I also showed you here the point total for Virgo, his 11th house, you can see that just like in the case of Ross Perot's, it's actually exceptional. Now, one thing I'm going to additionally introduce to the mix here is that I told you that for each sign, each house, there's a ruling planet, and of course, that planet's going to have an individual point total for that particular sign. And in the case of Ted Turner, you can see here is that his Virgo segment, ruled by Mercury, has 7 out of 8 individual point totals. So I'm going to stop here for a second, just pause here for a second, and just ask if there's any questions about anything I've said thus far. If anyone wants to ask a question. Apparently not, so I'll just go on. So I'm going to show you now here the chart of an extremely famous basketball player, considered one of the greatest basketball players of all time, a man by the name of LeBron James. And he had very humble beginnings. He was born to a 16-year-old unwed mother who was abandoned by the father. The father took no responsibility for the child. And he grew up in very, very impoverished circumstances, right? So one feature of this chart that indicates, you might say, not good karma with the father, is the fact that the ninth lord, Saturn, goes to the sixth house in an exchange with the sixth lord. So that's an unfavorable 6-9 exchange. He was actually born in the Mercury mahadasha, which is part of an Arishta yoga, the Lagna Lord in the sixth with malefic influence. So you see here these circumstances that he was born in. And then if you look at also the Sarvastika for the ninth house, you can see that it's actually extremely low. 19 is significantly low. So seeing these two things together, one could, accurately predict that his karmic experience with father was, quite unfavorable. But now, some of you may know and realize that the house ruling sports is the third house and the third lord. And here, in contrast to his lord, we see actually quite a benign, quite a good picture here, right? Jupiter is the 10th lord and the 7th lord. It's strong in its mulik sign. It's also at 27 degrees of Sagittarius. It's Vargotama, so quite strong. And it's with the sun here. This forms something called a Raja Lakshana Yoga, that is someone with noble and kingly characteristics. Actually, in the world of basketball, he's referred to it simply as the king. And of course, this is also part of a very good Gajikeshwari yoga, with Jupiter falling an angle both from the moon and from the birth lagna. Moon's actually in Jupiter's sign. This is therefore I might say an exceptional sort of Gajikeshwari yoga. But the sun, you can see here, is the third lord, right? And it has a source of strength because it goes to its own sign in Navamsha. Do I show this here? Yeah, you see the sun here. So third lord is very strong, and then see the point total for Leo, the third house, which is not that exceptional. It's above baseline. But what I want you to see here is that if we look at the individual point total for the sun, you'll see that it's really exceptional, really exceptional. You can see that it's 8 points out of 8. And so this is, again, from the static potential point of view, an indication that for him, all the indications of the third house, one of which is sports, would be extremely strong. And then given the yogas that the third lord is involved in, this would indicate his great success as a sports person, right? So, and then, as the last sort of example of this way, you all know who Bill Gates is. And the Lagna Lord, of course, is the pillar of the horoscope. It's one of the most important factors to evaluate. Any chart in which the Lagna Lord is strong and well placed benefits from that. All other features of the chart, all the other yogas in the chart, and express themselves usually in a more full way when that's the case. And you can see here that for Gates, his Lagna Lord Mercury, it's in its exaltation in an angle giving Bhadra Yoga. The Bhadra Yoga repeats from the moon, Mahapurush Yoga. Mercury here is the focal point of a magnificent Chandra Adi Yoga, with all the benefics, Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus falling in the 6, 7, and 8 from the moon, extremely bright waxing moon. So this is you might say, the exceptional condition of his Lagna Lord. But then if we see individual Sarvastika for his ascendant, you can see that it's quite high at 36 total points. But then if you look at the individual Banashtika, that the individual point total for Mercury, you can see again, it's quite exceptional, 8 out of 8. And this is one of the things that has contributed to him. And of course, what's all been about? It's been information systems, right? Information processing, computer applications. This is all Mercury to some degree, right? And so, again, from a static potential point of view, seeing this, you could see that in certain ways his horoscope is quite exceptional. So enough about those. I mean, I give a number of examples in my book here. You can, if you're interested, you can see these. One thing that, so this is right out of the Shastra, folks. This is right out of Parashar Hora. It's something that K. and Rao taught when I was studying Ashtakavarga with him. Just read along with me this quote from Parashar Hora. It says, if the 11th house is having more than the 10th house, and if the benefic points of the 12th house are less than those of the 11th house, and the ascendant has more benefic points, the person will be fortunate and wealthy. And the reverse situation would be true. So in other words, it's saying that, in general, it's good to have a high point total for the 9th, 10th, and 11th house. 9th is the house of Bhagya, your luck. 10th house is Karmasthana, your activity in the world. And your 11th house are the gains from that. And of course, the first house relates to you as an individual. So it stands to reason if the point totals are high, that's a favorable. So comparably, what this verse is saying is that you want the 11th house to be bigger than the 10th house, because that means you're getting the most for your efforts. And then you want to have a low point total for the 12th house, because this would be your expenses and your losses, right? So I'm illustrating this using the birth chart of former US President Bill Clinton. You can see that the 9th house is quite high. His point total for Gemini is also high. His 11th house, but comparatively, the 11th dramatically than the 10th house. But then the point total drops significantly with regards to the 12th house, where it's only 21 points. This is the kind of favorable patterning that is being spoken of in this verse from Parashar Hora. So in other words, that it's better to have more benefic points in the 11th and the 10th, since that would indicate more gains from fewer efforts in the world. Likewise, it is better to have many more gains than losses and expenses. So the 11th house should be greater than the 12th house. And so this pattern is reflected in Clinton's chart. So now I'm also showing you the chart of someone I think currently is one of the richest men in the world. He's certainly the richest man in France, Bernard Arnault. He's the chairman, CEO of this huge luxury goods conglomerate. And his worth, last time I checked, is worth about $86 billion, if you can imagine. His chart is a good chart for teaching dhan yogas. I won't go into that, but just showing you this same pattern here, where we have the point total for the 10th house is 32, again, fairly strong. And then it gets really strong, and it's a higher point total for the 11th house, which Gemini, 37 points. But then the real huge drop-off, the 20-point drop-off between the 11th house of gains and the 12th house of losses. So this is the kind of pattern. And, I give many more examples. I'll give one more here. Garry Kasparov is, considered by many to be some of the greatest chess players of all time. He was reigning chess champion for decades, so chess master. And you can see these him the 11th, and then drops off significantly to the 12th. So these are something that I wanted to show you in terms of one way of evaluating a chart from, you might say, the static potential point of view. What K. and Rao also talked about is, what he called quantum leaps. That is when you have one house that has a lower number of benefic points and the very next house is much higher, and a person can experience a sudden rise in life. And if the difference is very sharp, the rise can be quite significant. And you'll see here in the text that I use the chart of Queen Elizabeth to illustrate this. Now, some of you may not be aware, when Elizabeth was born, she was born to, you might say, the second son of the reigning king, so who, of course, was not in line for the throne, right? And therefore, she, particularly as a girl, it was never imagined, actually, that she would actually become the queen. But an extraordinary, unprecedented thing happened. The brother of her father, the older son, abdicated his throne in order to marry an American divorcee, which couldn't have happened if he would have remained king. All of a sudden, Elizabeth's father becomes king. He doesn't have any male heirs thereafter, and all of a sudden, she's the one that becomes the queen. So in her chart, you see this very precipitous rise from the point total in Libra, right, to the point total in Scorpio. And so if you want to see additional examples of this, I give a number of them. Also, Kay and Rao used to talk about the importance of the 11th house and the 6th house for politicians, because the 6th house, of course, is your opponents. It's also the competition, which is what an election is. The 11th house relates to winning, to victory. And so he always used to highlight the 6th Lord, the 11th Lord, the 6th house, 6th Lord, 11th house, 11th Lord for politicians. If you looked at the charts of former US presidents, John Kennedy and Bill Clinton, and say Indira Gandhi, who had an exchange between the 6th and 11th Lords, you'll see that. But he actually talked about evaluating the 11th house from Saturn. He explained that in a democracy, Saturn rules the masses, that is the Sudra classes, and politicians depend on their popularity with the masses to get elected. Therefore, the Sarvastika total for the 11th house from Saturn in the birth chart can shed light on, having public support. And I used the chart of Donald Trump to illustrate this. If you look at his point totals, you'll see that the highest point total comes in Taurus, right, which actually happens to be his 10th house. But the position of his Saturn, where's his chart here? I guess I don't give it, but his Saturn is in Cancer. So if you use Cancer as if it's the first house, the 11th house there becomes Taurus. And of course, one of the things Trump's known for, the fanatical support of his particular faction of followers. And you can see this also in the chart of Barack Obama. His Saturn is actually in the ascendant, and predicted back in, I guess it was 2008, that he would become the president of the United States. Of course, I was using all kinds of techniques and predictive tools within Jyotish to make that prediction. But the fact that both from his birth lagna and also the position of his Saturn, which is in Capricorn, you can see that the 11th house from there becomes really significant high, 38 points. So this is, one of the ways in which we use this. Now, there are ways in which you can use the individual point totals also to evaluate the static potentials of a birth chart. And in fact, in my experience, these can be a hidden source of strength of a planet. And actually, in order to illustrate this, rather than work off my document here, I want to pull up my program again. And let me get a particular chart up here. Most of you have probably heard of Dr. Deepak Chopra, right? Whoops. I'm pulling up his chart here. Hold on. Oops, somehow this is not letting me do this. I guess I won't do that. Let me go back to my program. So one thing to look at, the point I'm making about this, look at the, some of you are probably familiar with Agatha Christie. She was a very, very famous author. She wrote mysteries. In fact, is considered one of the greatest mystery writers of all time. And some of her most common and well-known works, things like Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, these things that have also been made into movies from her books, they all were written in her Jupiter major period, which is the 5th Lord of authorship. But you can see that it goes to the 6th house and it's in its debilitation sign. Now, there's a way in which such a planet gives Raja Yoga. I won't go into to explain that. But one thing you should see about Jupiter's individual point total, first of all, for Capricorn, it's fairly high, not too significantly 30, but you can see in Capricorn, it gets 6 out of 8. This is something that you should evaluate, for example, when you're seeing the static potential of the kind of results of traditional sources of strength like Dimshapaka Bala or Shad Bala or just its dignity, or it could be have some source of weakness. What I'm suggesting is that you should see the individual point total in the chart of Queen Victoria of England. You can see her Jupiter's also in its debilitation sign in good ninth house. That debilitation gets canceled because of its exchange with its sign Lord Saturn. But if you look at the point total here, again, it's 30, but the individual Banashya is actually quite high. You can see it's 7 out of 8. It was actually in a Jupiter that she initially became queen. Now, probably one of the most dramatic examples of that, and I'll move on after this. This is the chart of an old Hollywood movie star who was considered kind of one of the reigning queens of Hollywood during her heyday. And her greatest success came in the Jupiter major period. Jupiter here is the third lord of the dramatic arts. You can see its condition, it's in its exaltation sign, its degrees are such that it's also Vargotama, and it's acting back onto its own third house. It's also part of a partial Lagna Adi Yoga, where all the benefics are in 6th and 7th from the birth Lagna. And predictably, it was in this Jupiter major period that she had her greatest success. She was winning Academy Awards or being nominated for Academy Awards for Best Actress. But then see the individual point total for Jupiter in Cancer. It's at its highest point, 8 out of 8. Also, one of the performances that she's most known for was this movie, this film noir called Double Indemnity, which was released in April of 1944. If you look at the transit of the Dasha Lord Jupiter at that time, you could see that it was also transiting Cancer. So this is the kind of confluence between, first of all, static potentials, those static potentials being activated in the dasha system, and then highly supportive transits that then produce events, and in this case the most dramatic events of having this huge success in terms of a movie that most of you and a lot of you presenting her in viewing here are from the Indian background. Of course, you recognize the name Amitabh Bachchan. He first became a huge movie star in the Jupiter Mahadasha. You can see in his case, it rules the third house, not from the birth lagna, but from the moon. It's also involved in a good case for yoga with Jupiter, not just in its exaltation sign, but also Vargo. At its point total, you can see that the Sarvastika for Cancer is a whopping 42 points, really, really significantly high. And then the individual point total is 7 out of 8. One more example of this before I move on. So we have here of a very famous baseball player. He actually still holds the records for the most hits, career hits of anyone. And you can see here that his Mars is quite strong. It's in its exaltation sign. It's also in an exchange with its sign Lord Saturn. So it gives additional strength. But then if you look at its individual Banashtaka, you can see that it's, again, the highest point total possible. This is an incredibly, incredibly strong Mars. This man was known for having a competitive drive, just a driven desire to win, and would go to exceptional lengths and efforts in order to do this. These are, of course, all the natural significations of Mars. Now, before it gets too far here, and I'm running out of time, I do want to show you a prediction that I made. So what are people seeing on the screen now?
We are seeing Sri Jyotisha, your software.
Okay, thanks. For some reason, I don't know why. can't manipulate my screen anymore. So, why did this happen? I'm going to have to, boy, my screen won't manipulate, Sunil, and I don't know why. I may have to leave the meeting and come back. My apologies for this. Don't know what's going on here. Sorry, Sunil.
That's okay. No problem. It happens.
Well, no, it's no. Wait a second. Now maybe I can do this. Hold on. Exit full screen. Just give me a moment. No, it's not working. Huh. So, folks, here's what I'm going to do here. Let me just explain something. I know everybody can see charts in their head. So I wanted to talk about a recent prediction that I made using the Ashtakavarga. All right. So in 2016, a man came to me and he was about to run his Jupiter major period. And Jupiter was configured in both Raja and Dan yogas, pretty significant ones, right? So it was clear that he could experience both a career rise during this time and then also good financial that. So what happened is that he ended up forming a company. He became an entrepreneur, formed two other partners that started a computer cloud consulting company, right? And of course, what is every entrepreneur's dream? Every entrepreneur's dream is to start a company, have it do really, it attracts buyers, right? Who then purchase the company for many millions, and all the original entrepreneurs, all the original people started becoming walk-away wealthy. Now, so this was back in 2016 when I was originally discussing his chart with him and talking about the potentials of his Jupiter major period. Now, he recently contacted me because they had started to attract buyers. They had actually signed a letter of intent with one company to be purchased, and if this is after taxes, realize about $3 million, okay? And so he wanted to talk to me about whether I thought that the deal would go through, because apparently there were complications, there were obstacles, there were difficulties, there was some question whether these were going to go through. And now, of course, I'm evaluating that, and the dashas seem to indicate that he could have windfall gains in this way. But what I was also looking at, which makes Aquarius the 11th house, right? Makes Aquarius the 11th house of gains, particularly windfall gains. And it really is moving through Aquarius. So in other words, he was getting the transit of his own 11th Lord through the 11th house, right? Also evaluating was the Ashtakavarga associated with Aquarius. And it turns out it was significantly high. It was like Sarashtra's total points. And I believe it was 6 out of 8, which for Saturn is quite high. So this, along with what the dashas were showing, I predicted to him that the deal would go through, but for reasons I won't go into, with some delay and not at the level that he originally wanted it or thought it to be the case. All of which turned out to be true. He is going to walk away with about $3 million after taxes, right? So it's an example showing it the screen. I'm just explaining it verbally here. It's an example of a recent time in which I used the Ashtakavarga in order to make a prediction. Again, using it to qualify transits, right? To qualify transits. Now, let me explain another situation to you. I was in India in 2014. I was touring sacred sites, pilgrimage sites in the north, Kedarnath, Badranath, and so forth. And I was with a man who knew a little astrology. And he had his moon in Libra. And at that time, Saturn was moving through Libra. So he was in the Sade Sati, right? But he was saying that, nothing bad is happening. There's not been anything going on that, has been difficult in my life, gotten through the main part of the Sade Sati unscathed, you might say. Well, if you looked at this point total for Saturn in Libra, it was extremely high. right? It was like, 35 or maybe 38 with a high point total. So that phase of the Sade Sat was not really being that troublesome. But the next sign that Saturn moved into, which would be Scorpio, which was the sign after the moon, had a point total of 17 and a point total individually for Saturn of 1. And so that phase of the Sade Sat for him, his whole life fell apart. I won't go into details about it, right? But then it proved just to be extremely, extremely problematic, very, very difficult. So again, this would be a perfect example, and I'm sorry I'm not showing it to you, I'm just explaining it verbally, of how important it is to use the Ashtakavarga in order to qualify transits, particularly a transit like the Sade Sat. I can show you another example where the person had their moon exalted in Taurus with a very, very high point total of their Savastika and their individual point total. It's the chart of a pop music star here in the US who got inducted into the Pop Music Hall of Fame during their Sade Sat, right? Be an example of a way Indira Gandhi she first became prime minister in the period of her Sade Sat. Of course, her moon's in the 7th house. She also lost her husband during that time. But the moon is in the sign of Saturn, aspected by Saturn. Some of the most problematic Sade Sats that you are going to experience is when I'm watching a lot of moons in Aquarius these days with the aspect of Saturn additionally at birth, where there's Saturn moving through Aquarius and where the point totals are not good at all. And of course, they're really struggling in different ways in their life during this time and experiencing the theme of the Sade Sat, which is usually loss in some way. So my apologies for my malfunction here technically. I'll make sure this doesn't happen next time. I'm due to present, I think, next week, but maybe we can open it for questions now, Sunil, to the audience here, and I can address any of those questions. Again, if you'd like to get the full picture, my book here, Ashtakavarga Simplified, it's available on Amazon.com, both in print form, but also electronic form. You can get it on Kindle. I think it'd be only $9.99, something like that. So not very cost prohibitive. And since I have you here, I want to, for K.N. Rao, the Jaimini was a speciality of his. The Jaimini system of Jyotish was a speciality of his, and as a result, it has become a speciality of mine. And so I just mentioned that I've published a number of books on the Jaimini system. If you're interested, the first book, The Essentials of Jaimini, is what you want to get. That's again available on Amazon.com, both in print and e-format. Is this book here called Predicting with Jaimini's Charakarakas, right? It takes each of like we use the 7 karakas. There's a chapter and talks about all the predictions that one can make using Jaimini's Charakarakas. And this is what my presentation is going to be on the next time I present, which I believe is next Sunday. I invite you all to join me. Sometimes events come out just in a very simple, elegant way in the Jaimini system, which is one of the reasons I love it. And what I mean by that is that each of the karakas represents some person in your life, but also other things. If you run the sign period, and of course in Jaimini the dashas are signs, not planets. If you run the sign period of a planet containing a karaka, you'll see that events related to that karaka take place. So it's a simple one-factor analysis, meaning if the planet with the lowest degrees, your Dara karaka, is in a particular sign, and you run that period, it shows a great eligibility for bringing marriage or a relationship just based on that factor, right? All right, so I will stop at this point, and I will invite the audience to ask any questions about my presentation here or any other question you might have.
Thank you so much, Marc Boney. My request to everybody, if you want to ask questions, please keep your camera on. The first question is from Professor C.S. Rao. Professor Rao is also a speaker and a great master of KP astrology. Kindly, please come on camera. You were there on camera. Now I don't see you.
Yes, sir. Professor, you have to unmute yourself.
Professor Rao, I've asked you to unmute.
Right. Thank you, sir. It is unmuted. Okay. Namaste, sir. Marc
Namaste.
Boney, sir. My point is transit values on the zero bindus of the kakshas in Ashtakavarga, in kaksha, in a part of the bhava, kaksha, where 0 points are there, transit influence on.
So,
Am I clear? Am I clear, sir?
yes, you are clear. Now, he's bringing up an element of the Ashtakavarga that I didn't refer to because I was trying to keep it very simple, right? There's these things called kakshas, right? They're a point within a particular sign that a transit can be moving through where it can have a benefic point or it cannot have a benefic point, okay? And actually in my book, I taught this. I didn't get into it today. And so if a planet's moving through, say Mars is moving through Cancer, which of course is its debilitation sign, say it has a low point total, Sarvastika, and a low individual point total, and then it's also moving us through a segment that is the Kaksha without a benefic point, this can be a dangerous period in terms of natural significations of Mars and things that can happen during this time. Again, this is an aspect of Ashtakavarga that I did not get into, but I appreciate the question and I hope I've answered it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very good explanation. We have correlated both the subs and qualitative and quantitative analysis, mostly the quantitative in Ashtakavarga, and you have best calculated, high best. Very good. Thank you for the.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Any other questions? Please mute your mic now, sir. Please mute your mic now. There you go. Thank you. Any other questions?
One quick question, Marc Boney. There are two types of calculations given in software. One is calculation of Ashtakavarga via Varamira method or Parashari method. Which one do you prefer?
I'm glad you asked that question because I probably should have clarified that. I followed my teacher's example, K.N. Rao, that insisted upon 337 benefic points as given in Varaha Mahira's Brihat Jataka, not the point total given in Parashahora. All his good results, he said, including the Shodapinda, which is the finest level of Ashtakavarga, were based on 337 benefic points. I have followed his example. I have found this to be the most accurate as well. So go by Varaha Mahira. Your programs give you an option. So when you're looking at Ashtakavarga, my recommendation is to use that option. Good question. Thank you for it.
Another thing I would like to tell the viewers, if you want to ask questions, please put your cameras on, okay? And then we would this thing, and also please let your questions be brief also so that everybody's questions can be covered. Vishweshwarji, I'm asking you to unmute yourself. Please ask a question.
So, sir, I have a question. You saw the chart of, I suppose, Bill Gates, a chart you showed where Mercury and Mars were in exchange for the Yoga, 11th Lord and 1st Lord. We know for Scorpio ascendant, Mercury becomes functional malefic also, and 11th Lord is also functional malefic. So, it shows the Yoga, but can it give the health issues as well?
It's interesting you should ask that. So you're referring to the chart of a man named Ted Turner, who was a media mogul, right? Worldwide, billionaire. And as I said, because that exchange is a done yoga given exchange, 111, it made him very, very wealthy during that period. But it's also Mercury as an 8th Lord in the Lagna, connected strongly to the Lagna Lord. He was also suicidal during that period, if you can imagine. Okay? This should answer your question. So Mercury as an 11th Lord for Scorpio, I can show you example after example where it can be very wealth giving, right? But as an 8th Lord, particularly with affliction, wasn't his case, very problematic when you run that period in terms of some of the results that can give. Okay. Good question. What else?
Srinivas Kulkarni ji, please ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask you to unmute. You're unmuted.
You have to, if you're going to ask your question, you have to unmute your mic at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah. Yeah. Good evening, sir. Marc Boney ji. Namaste to your feed, sir. Sir, my question is a little bit 2-3 steps are there. See, Pisces Lagna, Vargottama Lagna. Point number 1. Point number 2. It is in the content of 29 degrees 20 minutes. Third thing, it has got 28 points, and Lagna Lord Jupiter is in 12th house along with Venus, and 12th house is 18 Sarvastakara.
Seriously, if it's a personal chart, it becomes a consultation. You
No,
need
no,
to
sir.
ask. You need to ask a
Chart
theoretical
just, it's not a personal, sir. Just for clarity, I am asking, sir. But it's not personal chance.
Okay, I'm following, you know, Pisces Lagna, late degree, Gandanta, Jupiter in the 12th with Venus. What else? What's the question?
Yeah, Sarvashtakavarga of Lagna is 28 points, and
Baseline.
Sarvashtakavarga of 12th house, because Lagna Lord in 12th house. No, so that 12th house Sarvashtakavarga is 18. So how to interpret, sir?
Well, you know, you have to understand that Jupiter, as the Lagna Lord in the 12th, with the 8th Lord Venus, right, is something of an Arishta yoga, right? And, you know, the Lagna has a baseline strength, but the Lagna Lord is in a sign where the Sarvastika is quite low. And I would presume then the individual point total is low. And so it can be a combination that can give health problems, particularly when that combination is activated. But again, you know, this is more like consulting about a particular chart, and these shouldn't be the kind of questions that
Okay,
are asked.
thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We have one more question. I presume the last one. Rohan Kumarji, if you can keep your camera on, please. Yes, you unmuted.
Go ahead. Who's, I'm not hearing, someone might be talking, but I'm not hearing you. Is anyone hearing him?
Rohan Kumar, can you be loud, please?
Oh, you know, I see he's walking, maybe he's getting a better internet connection, but we can't hear your voice. And you just unmuted yourself. I'm just muted yourself.
Okay. Anyone else has a question? Bhavna ji has a question. I have asked you to unmute yourself.
Bhavana, go ahead.
Namaste, Marci. How are you?
Good to see you again.
Same here. Marci, I have a very basic question. What if the Sarvashtakavarga score is above average, but the individual score is low? Will that
Okay.
Sarvashtakavarga save the low BAV?
Well, so, you know, say that low point total is Saturn's point total, okay? So when Saturn is moving that through that time, even though the Sarvastika is, you know, adequate or baseline or whatever, Saturn's transit through that sign with a very low individual total would not be a favorable transit. There would be an unfavorable factor for qualifying that transit.
Thank you.
That would be true. That would be true for any planet. Right? Of course, the best extreme is when the point total is high, and then for both, or then the other extreme is when the both point total is bad for both. It's more of a mixed condition, as you described, where the point total is totally, I mean, the Sarvastika is okay, but the individual Manashka, but that transit of that planet through that sign, because its individual point total is so low, that's the important thing to look at. Is it clear?
Yes, Marci. Thank you.
Sure.
Ronald has
Okay.
a question. Ronald,
All right.
would you like to ask on camera? You put it in the
Chat.
Okay. Ronald, if you'd like to ask, otherwise I would read out a question. It's not related to Ashtakavarga. I do not know if it's fine with you, Mark ji. How do you predict people don't believe friends who follow spiritual practices, but don't think much about astrology? Always puzzled me. Really great webinar. I'm learning a great deal. Thank you for this. I mean, it's a very general question whether people believe.
But you know, I'll respond to it. When people ask me, when they say, "Do you believe in astrology?" I say, "No, I don't believe in astrology. I know that astrology is valid because I've learned it, I've applied it, I've tested it." These people who say they don't believe in astrology, they haven't learned it, they haven't tried it, they haven't tested it. So they're coming from a place not of having experimented with it, area of belief. I point this out to them. But I found it absolutely useless to argue with people and want to about whether astrology, you believe it or not, or you think it's valid or not. I know they don't.
Thank you so much. I guess all the questions are over, and I do not know if you've seen, so many people have appreciated your lecture in the chat box. They have kept on half an hour back it started. People loved your lecture and they kept on writing about it, how much they loved it, how they felt it was very deep also. And I'm quite sure this is one of the many sessions that's to come. And what I wrote to Marc Boney ji in my email to him, his interview is ending with Saptarishis Astrology. It's just been my bad luck, my health, that we've not done this years. It's so wonderful today to connect with you. I guess when the time is right, as they say. So it's really wonderful. Thank you so much, Marc Boney ji, and see you next week with another mind-blowing lecture. And absolutely pranam to you, sir. Charan Sparsh.
Thank you. I don't know if it'll be mind-blowing, but hopefully people will learn something. And thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. You've been a wonderful group to present to, and I hope to see you all again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank
Take care. Bye for now. Namaste.
Namaste. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marc Boney ji. Girish, if you can stop the recording and restart it. Do we have Gary Gomes?